A 600-acre Texas ranch stretches beyond the horizon, water pulled from the ground, horses moving through open fields. This is where Chuck Norris, worth $70 million, chose to live. Then 10 days later, he was gone. No warning. But that's not the whole story. Behind the image was a daughter hidden for decades, and a wife who changed everything. So much that he walked away from Hollywood at the peak of his power. So what was really happening in his life during those final years? And why did he choose to keep it hidden in Texas? Let's take a closer look at the life he kept private, and the truth behind how it ended. On March 10th, 2026, Chuck Norris posted a short video from Hawaii. He was turning 86. In the clip, he was training. Controlled strikes, steady movement, nothing exaggerated. The caption was direct. "I don't age, I level up." In the same message, he said he was grateful for good health and for being able to keep doing what he loved. There was no ambiguity in how he presented himself. He was active, alert, and still working his body the way he always had. That post went live 9 days before he died. On the island of Kauai, where he owned a home, Norris kept a routine that hadn't changed much in years. Training sessions, time with family, calls with friends. According to early reports, he was still in that routine right up until the incident. He had been speaking normally, even joking on the phone shortly before everything shifted. There was nothing in those final hours that suggested anything unusual. Then, within a narrow window of time, he suffered what was later described as a sudden medical emergency. He was taken to Wilcox Medical Center in Lihu, the primary hospital on the island for acute cases. The situation escalated quickly. The initial information coming out did not explain what had happened, only that it was serious enough to require immediate care. The next update came not as a medical report, but as a family statement. On March 20th, 2026, his family confirmed that Chuck Norris had died at 86 years old. They described it as a sudden passing and stated that he was surrounded by family. Then they made a clear decision. The cause of death would not be made public. They asked for privacy and left it there. That choice defined how the news was received. There was no official explanation to analyze, no confirmed condition to trace backward. What remained were only fixed points: a birthday video showing him training, reports that he was in good spirits, a sudden hospitalization in Hawaii, and a death confirmed less than 24 hours later. The contrast between those points is what drew attention. A man publicly describing himself as healthy on March 10th, still active and training days later, then hospitalized and gone by March 19th. The gap between those moments was short, and it was never filled in with details. In the days that followed, attention shifted to what would come next. As of now, the Norris family has not released full details about funeral arrangements, but it has been confirmed that there will be 2 separate ceremonies: a private service for family and a larger memorial event to honor his life and legacy. Sources close to the family indicate that Chuck Norris will likely be laid to rest in Texas, the place most closely tied to his public identity. His connection to the state went beyond television. In 2010, he was officially named an honorary Texas Ranger by Rick Perry, a recognition he carried with genuine pride. Texas was not just where he worked. It was where his image settled, where the name Walker became inseparable from who he was. Up to now, the family still has made one request clear: privacy. They have asked both media and fans to respect their space during this period and to allow the private ceremony to remain exactly that: private. At the same time, they pointed people towards something that mattered deeply to him. Instead of flowers, they encouraged donations to Kickstart Kids, the program he founded in 1990. Over the years, it has reached more than 100,000 students using martial arts to teach discipline, structure, and character to young people across Texas. That request quietly redirected attention. from the unanswered questions about his death to the life he had built and the people who carried it forward. While the private farewell remains within the family, the broader story doesn't end there. It continues through those closest to him, his children. The truth about Chuck Norris's children. By the time Chuck Norris passed away in 2026, his family had already grown into something much larger than the image people saw on screen. He wasn't just the father of 5 children. He had become the center of a multi-generational family that continued to expand even in his final months. His oldest son, Mike Norris, was 63 years old in 2026. He had long established himself in the entertainment industry, first appearing alongside his father in Walker, Texas Ranger, then moving into directing and producing. By 2026, Mike was no longer just Chuck Norris's son. He had built his own career, his own family, and his own legacy. He and his wife Valerie had 3 children, and at the start of 2026, their family was preparing for another milestone, their first grandchild, meaning Chuck Norris was about to become a great-grandfather for the first time. Just a few years younger, Eric Norris, 60 years old in 2026, followed a different but equally demanding path. He became a professional stuntman and later a NASCAR champion, a career that required the same discipline and risk tolerance his father had built his life on. Eric didn't just stay close to the action, he built a life inside it. By 2026, he and his wife Stephanie had 4 children, making him one of the key links between Chuck's legacy and the next generation. Then there was Gina Norris Diccioli, 61 years old in 2026, whose place in the family came later but became just as strong. After discovering her connection to Norris as an adult, she built a relationship with him that continued over the years. By the time of his passing, Gina had her own family, including 2 sons, and remained part of the extended Norris family dynamic. The final chapter of his fatherhood came much later in life. In 2001, Norris welcomed twins with Gina O'Kelly, and by 2026, both were 24 years old. His son, Dakota Norris, had grown into the closest reflection of his father's discipline. He earned a 5th-degree black belt and frequently trained alongside Norris, not as a student alone, but as a partner. In late 2025, Dakota entered a new phase of life, getting married after a long-term relationship, marking the beginning of his own family journey just months before his father's death. His daughter, Danielle Norris, also 24 in 2026, shared a quieter but deeply personal bond with him. In early 2026, she became engaged after nearly a decade-long relationship, another sign that the next generation of the family was stepping forward at the exact moment Norris's life was coming to an end. By the time everything was counted, Chuck Norris had 6 grandchildren, with a 7th on the way in 2026. Although he gone, his story didn't end with 5 children. It extended into a growing family that was still expanding even as he passed. That future didn't exist on its own. It was shaped, held together, and protected by the one person who stood closest to him in his final years, the woman who made him walk away. When Chuck Norris married Gina O'Kelly on November 28, 1998, it wasn't the beginning of a clean, simple love story. It came after a life that was already layered with history most people didn't fully see. Norris had spent 30 years married to his first wife, Diane Holacek, the girl he met in high school, the woman who stood beside him before the fame, before the money, before the image. They had 2 sons together, built a family, and stayed married through his rise until the marriage ended in 1988. No public explanation, just an ending after 3 decades. But even that wasn't the full picture. During that first marriage, while serving in the Air Force, Norris had an affair with a woman named Johanna, who didn't even know he was married. From that relationship, a daughter was born in 1964, Gina Norris Diccioli. He didn't raise her. He didn't even know she existed until she was 26 years old when a letter arrived. He later recalled the moment in his own words. "I open it up, and she says, 'I'm your daughter.'" What followed was not denial, not distance. When they finally met, he described it simply. "We just went into each other's arms and started crying." That is also the time Gina stepped into. And yet their relationship moved quickly. Norris was 23 years older than her. He was already a global name. She was a former model and TV personality with a completely different pace of life. They met in 1997 in Dallas. The next day, he asked her out. Within a year, they were married. After that, everything shifted location and priority. They didn't build their life in Hollywood. They built it in Texas, on a ranch in Navasota, near Houston. While his name remained tied to Walker, Texas Ranger, the real version of him was no longer on set. It was on that land, running a household, raising children, managing business, staying out of the industry unless he chose to return briefly. In 2001, they had twins, Dakota and Danilee, when Norris was already in his 60s. That alone changed his life. While his older children were already grown, he was starting again, raising young kids at an age when most men are slowing down. Then came the moment that redefined everything. In 2013, after undergoing MRI scans, Gina developed severe complications linked to gadolinium contrast injections. She suffered kidney problems, chronic pain, and rheumatoid symptoms. Her condition didn't resolve quickly. It escalated into something that required constant attention. Norris didn't balance it with work. He stopped. He said it directly. He had walked away from his film career to care for his wife. At the same time, they spent around $2 million pursuing awareness and legal action tied to what happened to her, refusing to treat it as something to quietly accept. From that point forward, their life narrowed into a very specific structure. Their ranch in Texas, their children, their foundation Kickstart Kids, and their business C-Force, where Gina served as CEO. She wasn't just present. She was running operations, co-building the foundation, and staying at the center of everything they did. She even described what mattered most to them in a 2023 interview. "We've reached more than 100,000 kids, and the breakthroughs mean the world to us." That statement reflects where their focus actually was, not Hollywood, not image, but what they were building together. By the time Norris reached his 80s, the shift was complete. The man who had once built a career on physical dominance was living a life defined by routine, caregiving, and presence. The public still saw the legend until he died in March 2026. He was survived by his wife, Gina, 5 children and 7 grandchildren. He also left a system he had built over decades, one that continued to function even after he stepped away from the spotlight. Chuck Norris's $70 million net worth and the Texas ranch that defined his final life. By the time Chuck Norris died in 2026, the $70 million attached to his name came from sources that kept paying long after he stepped away from Hollywood. Walker, Texas Ranger remained the backbone, generating steady income through syndication and licensing for decades, strong enough that in 2018 he pursued roughly $30 million in disputed profits from CBS and Sony. Alongside that, his United Fighting Arts Federation expanded into more than 1,000 martial arts schools worldwide, bringing in an estimated $5 to $10 million annually in franchise-related revenue. Then there was C-Force, the supplement and artesian water brand he built with Gina O'Kelly, producing multi-million-dollar sales tied directly to his health-focused image. Books, endorsements, and smaller ventures filled in the rest, but those 3 pillars, television residuals, martial arts infrastructure, and wellness products, are what kept his net worth stable for over a decade. But that $70 million only becomes real when you look at where it settled. And that place was his ranch in Navasota, Texas. The property stretched across roughly 600 acres, not a symbolic number, but a working scale of land large enough to operate independently. When Chuck Norris first acquired it in the early 1990s for under $1 million, it was mostly open terrain. Over time, he didn't just upgrade it, he structured it. By 2026, the ranch was valued between $10 and $15 million, making up a significant portion of his total wealth. But more importantly, it functioned as a self-contained environment. At the center sat the main residence, built for long-term living rather than display, wide layouts, practical interiors, and direct access to the surrounding land. Around it were multiple guest lodges, not decorative, but used regularly by extended family and visitors. The property included fully developed equestrian facilities, horse barns, fenced riding areas, and open pasture designed for daily use, not occasional recreation. Then came the part most people overlook: the infrastructure tied directly to his business. Beneath the land were natural artesian wells, and Norris built a working bottling facility on site to support the Seaforce brand. That means part of his income literally came out of the ground he lived on. The ranch wasn't just an asset on paper, it was a production site, integrated into his financial system. There were also training areas, both indoor and outdoor, where he continued practicing martial arts well into his 80s. Not staged, not for cameras, just part of his routine. The open land allowed for private shooting ranges, utility buildings, storage facilities, and enough separation between structures that the property functioned more like a compound than a traditional home. But the scale people often miss is that the ranch extended beyond those core 600 acres. When accounting for surrounding land and expansion over time, the broader estate has been described as reaching close to 1,000 acres of rolling terrain, stretching across open meadows with no visual interruption from urban development. The architecture followed that same logic. Instead of vertical luxury, the structures spread horizontally, with low sloping roofs, wood and stone finishes, and neutral earth-toned materials designed to blend directly into the Texas landscape rather than stand apart from it. Inside, the design wasn't decorative, it was strategic. Large windows and covered porches opened the house toward the land, creating a continuous flow between interior and exterior spaces. This wasn't just aesthetic. It allowed for cross-ventilation and natural cooling, reducing dependence on artificial systems and aligning with the kind of self-sufficient environment Norris preferred. The ranch also functioned as a complete ecosystem. Beyond horses, the land supported buffalo, adding to the working nature of the property. A private lake sat within the layout, not as decoration, but as a central feature that shaped movement across the land. Even the training spaces followed that same philosophy. There were no oversized, polished gyms. Instead, the areas were built to be functional, open, and integrated into the environment, where physical training became part of the landscape rather than something separated from it. His daily life there followed a pattern that matched exactly what he had built over decades. He trained in the morning. He spent time riding or walking the land. He handled business from the property itself, without needing to travel. His children grew up there, away from media attention. The foundation he cared about, Kickstart Kids, remained rooted in Texas, tying his public work back to the same place he lived. That's why the ranch mattered differently than any house he had ever owned. It wasn't designed to impress. It was designed to replace everything else. By the time he reached his 80s, he no longer needed Los Angeles, studios, or production schedules. Everything he required, income, family, work, privacy, existed inside those acres. The land gave him something Hollywood never could: control over time. After his death in 2026, that property didn't become irrelevant or symbolic. It remains one of the most concrete pieces of his legacy, still tied to his family, still capable of generating income through the water operation, still holding the structure of the life he chose in his final decades. The $70 million tells you how much he built. The ranch shows you exactly what he did with it. And in the end, that may be the most honest way to understand Chuck Norris. Not through the fights, not through the fame, but through the choices he made when no one was watching, where he lived, what he built, and who he stayed for. So here's the question that stays with you. Did Chuck Norris walk away from the spotlight? Or did he figure out something the rest of the industry never did? Tell me what you think in the comments. And if you're into stories that go deeper than the surface, hit like, subscribe, and stay with me. Because the next story might change how you see someone you thought you already understood.